A.L. Kennedy.
This is a poem, if you'll allow me. Simon McBurney, my hero from forever.
A.L. Kennedy, my hero.
God bless you. I've got a poem that Adrian Mitchell wrote, and he used to rewrite it, He used to rewrite it for special occasions, and were he not dead, he would have rewritten it for this special occasion. I need help from you, obviously, so that I don't die horribly when I'm old and frail in a hellish wasteland, but also I need help specifically at the moment. This is called To Whom It May Concern, Telling Lies About Climate Change. It used to be Telling Lies About Vietnam. Some of you will remember it. So when I put my hand up like this, I would like you to say, Telling Lies About Climate Change. So can we rehearse? 1, 2, 3. Telling lies about climate change. Cool. You got it in one. I don't even have to do that again. So, to whom it may concern. I was run over by the truth one day. Ever since the accident, I've walked this way. So wrap my face in plastic. Tell me lies about climate change. Heard whole ocean screaming with pain. Couldn't find myself, so I went back to sleep again. So fill my ears with money. Wrap my face in plastic. Tell me lies about climate change. Every time I shut my eyes, all I see is flames. Took my extinction notebook and crossed off this morning's names. So coat my eyes with cruelty, fill my ears with money, wrap my face in plastic. Tell me lies about climate change. I smell something burning. I hope it's just my brains. I'm counting climate refugees in dust and chains. So stuff my nose with drowning, coat my eyes with cruelty, fill my ears with money, wrap my face in plastic. Tell me lies about climate change. Where were you when we called out your crime? Shaking hands with oil men and wasting our time. So trump my truth with yelling, stuff my nose with drowning, coat my eyes with cruelty, fill my ears with money, wrap my face in plastic. Tell me lies about climate change. And can you face your children? Look into their eyes, say you think they're stupid and burn their skies? So fill my mouth with hating, trump my facts with yelling, stuff my nose with drowning, coat my eyes with cruelty, fill my ears with money, wrap my face in plastic. Tell me lies about climate change. You put your missiles in, you put your conscience out, you take the human species and you twist it all about. You take good sense and mercy and you twist them all about. You take the facts and figures and you twist them all about. So fill my mouth with hating, dig my grave for profit, trump my truth with yelling, stuff my nose with drowning, coat my eyes with cruelty, fill my ears with money, wrap my face in plastic. Tell me lies about climate change. Tell me lies, Mr. Trump. Tell me lies about climate change. Tell me lies, Mr. Bolsonaro. Tell me lies about climate change. Tell me lies, Mr. Putin. Tell me lies about climate change. Tell me lies, Prime Minister. Tell me lies about climate change. One more time. Tell me lies about climate change. Thank you very much for being here.
John Berger has written that the quality of poetry is not only that it speaks, but it also listens. And the next person who's going to speak is somebody whose poetry really listens. He won the Forward Prize for Poetry in 2007 with a wonderful collection called Look, We Have Coming to Dover. He was appointed in 2015 as Radio 4's Poet in Residence. Please welcome Dajlit Nagra.
Thank you very much. Yeah, the quality of listening, and one of the words I hear over and over again is migrants. There's this one summarising catch-all word that captures, grandparents, parents, children, babies, where they're washed up on the beach, whether they're supposedly attacking people. And it's quite convenient, isn't it, to use the word migrant to sum up these people so it can be attacked by a certain community. So I'm going to read a couple of poems about migration, I guess, because it's the big issue that's waiting for us. So this is, I guess, really inspired by detention centre Sangat about 10 years ago, when people were locked up and treated so badly in the detention centre. In some cases, they were stitching up their eyelids and stitching up their lips as a kind of protest, but done nothing wrong. And I guess Guantanamo's in here as well. And I imagine it's a kind of demented skipping song. So it's called X. I knot my tongue, I nail my lips, I zip my lids, and still you say, I say you harm. You hook my arms, you hood my head, you lose my legs, and still you say, I say you harm. Okay, I'm going to just... one other poem, next one, just a ghazal. Some of you may have heard of the ghazal form, Middle Eastern form used in Asia, Asian countries, I'm thinking particularly of India. And I'm going to repeat, the repeat word in the poem is inshallah, about the Middle East crisis. So it's just called ghazal. Is the habeas corpus in the desert? Inshallah. Is the Human Rights Act in Abu Ghraib calling cards for the Ghazi desert? Inshallah. Does the Kaaba glow on the road to Raqqa? What swollen paths will these sandals tread for the curse of Jerusalem? Inshallah. Why are my daughters in the desert? Oh, inshallah. Who picks the pen from the head so its flesh hardened to a text in Muezzin cry? Inshallah. Does one man set himself alight when his Allah is beheaded by another man's Allah, so all Arabia cry to the last, inshallah. Thank you.
Thank you, Dajlit. And now, ladies and gentlemen, as a novelist, a writer of games, lead writer, oh, I love this, she was a lead writer of Zombies Run. She's a protege of Margaret Atwood's, winner of the Orange Prize for New Writers in 2016, Bailey's Women's Prize for Fiction 2017 for remarkable novel Power. Please welcome Naomi Alderman. Thank you very much.
Hello. As was just said, I have been incredibly privileged in my life to travel in some of the last remaining wildernesses of the world with Margaret Atwood and with Graham Gibson, her partner, who died last month. I remember when I first met Margaret and Graham, I said to them, oh God, is knowing you going to turn me into an environmentalist? And they said yes, and so it has been. So in honour of the wonderful Graham Gibson, I wanted to read some of his words. He was an extraordinary man who had a huge love for the natural world. He devoted his life to saving endangered environments, to protecting places where the last remaining environments that certain species could live in. His life and his legacy is an inspiration to all of us. This is a couple of passages of his about how we got ourselves into this terrible shitstorm we're in. In common with all living things, we humans emerged within the leisurely passage of evolutionary time. But then, bipedalism freed our hands, and our opposable thumbs encouraged sophisticated tool-making. This, coupled with the remarkable complexity of our growing language skills, led to the development of our remarkable brains, which, unfortunately, given the reality of our animal origins, live inside us like alien beings. Astonishingly, the brain has almost persuaded us that we have no debt to nature. No debt to... How are we doing? Try again? That we have no debt to nature, that we owe it neither allegiance nor respect, let alone reverence. When did we begin to fence ourselves in? Jared Diamond's article, The Worst Mistake in the History of the Human Race, demolishes the view that the agricultural revolution freed our hunter-gatherer forebears from lives that were nasty, brutish and short. Diamond tells us that the life expectancy for hunter-gatherers was about 26 years, whereas that of early farmers fell to 19 years. Skeletons of the period reveal a 50% increase in malnutrition, a 4-fold increase in anemia, a 3-fold increase in bone lesions reflecting infectious diseases. That's what happened when we started doing agriculture. Settling in family groups on specific areas of land was not only bad for our health, but it imposed relentless drudgery and want and led to overpopulation and widespread inequality, all of which continue to bedevil the vast majority of us human animals. Moreover, the agricultural revolution fundamentally transformed our relationship with the wild natural world. With our dependence on domesticated animals and plants within our fences, we came to resent and fear all that we had not bred or planted, all that we had not cultivated and civilized. We came to use those words interchangeably, just as we came to believe that the land and its produce were ours, and that the real animals, the valuable animals, were in our barnyards or pastures or curled up by our fire. Wild animals who trespassed for food were considered vermin, best to be shot on sight. Indeed, we decided it was better to kill them before they discovered our property. Over time, this practice morphed into recreational hunting and killing just for fun. As we have become dependent on monocultures and on our dull, slavishly exploited and commercially useful animals, as we have come to share many of these qualities, we have lost touch with the magic animals of our past, and with them, the dynamic and redemptive sense of our collective place in the extraordinary event that is life on Earth. Thank you, and let us hope that we can find that place again. Strength and power.
Can you put me on? Oh, good. Thanks very much. Can you hear at the back? Yeah, you can more or less hear? Good. Okay. Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so now a man who the New York Times has called a master storyteller. He won the Booker Prize. He was a Booker Prize nominee for his novel Reef in 1994, and his latest novel, Suncatcher, is set in the country of his birth, Sri Lanka, in 1964. I'd like you to welcome, please, somebody who was very important for me in my life, Romesh Gunesekera.
Thank you very much, and thank you for giving me the prize as well. That's great. It's really nice to see all of you here. See lots of cameras around, but there isn't one pointing at you, so I'm going to point one at you. I think it's about time you had pictures. And there's a bookshop behind you as well. Brilliant. I'm usually quite late to the party, but on this occasion, I think I was really quite early to it, because I'm going to read you a short piece from a book published 25 years ago, and it seems to be quite right for today. It's this book, Reef, and at the center of this book is a man called Mr. Salgado, and it's about his love affair. But he's a marine biologist in Sri Lanka back in the 1960s. One of his obsessions is the coral reef and the damage human beings are causing it. He says, you see, this polyp is really very delicate. It survived eons, but even a small change in the immediate environment, the temperature, could kill it. Then the whole thing will go. And if the structure is destroyed, the sea will rush in, the sand will go, the beach will disappear. You see, it's only the skin of the reef that is alive. Mr. Salgado threw up his hands, but who cares? Now to me, never mind from the book, to me a novel is a bit like a reef. It's a structure of words that's nourished by imagination, by the imagination of readers who renew it and keep it alive. And with a bit of luck, the novel might renew and keep a reader's imagination alive. But the imagination is like those polyps, those coral polyps, very strong, but also very, very vulnerable. Vulnerable to, well, as Al Kennedy was saying, to lies, vulnerable to all sorts of things that are going on. But what I'd like to do is read you a couple of pages of Mr. Salgado and his companion, the narrator of the book, Triton, from near the end of the book, when they come to Britain. And we go in our imaginations to a British coast, and then with them in our imaginations to a coast in Sri Lanka. But it comes from a section in the book which I thought was kind of appropriate, being where we are next to that road, because it's called, the section's called the Strand Line. And this is how it goes. It won't take very long. There was a pebble beach at the bottom of the cliff near the cottage. When the tide retreated, the shingle gave way to muddy sand and revealed the debris of a whole new world to me. Irish moss, moon jelly, sea kelp, razor clams and cockle shells, sand dollars, and nylon rope. In the evenings, when I walked along the path of crushed purple-ringed mussel shells, I would hear the seabirds cry, plaintive calls of cormorants and black-tipped herring gulls, as sad as our uprooted, overshadowed lives. Then the northern sun would find its prism, and the sky would flare into an incandescent sunset above the oil refinery on the other side of the estuary. Petrochemicals stained the air in mauve and pink. The sea shimmering between the black humps of barnacled rocks, mullioned with gold bladderwrack like beached whales, thickened into a great beast, reaching landward, snuffling and gurgling. The sky would redden, the earth redden, the sea redden. I asked Mr. Salgado, do all the oceans flow into each other? Is it the same sea here as back home? Maybe, he shrugged. The earth has spun with real stars under a beautiful blue robe ever since the beginning of time. Now as the coral disappears, there'll be nothing but sea, and we'll all return to it. One day I showed him a newspaper report about a symposium on man and coral. You should have been there, I said, presiding over it all. He looked wistful. It was a kind of obsession before. But other people at last, I said, all over the world, seem to share that obsession about the coral reefs. He said, you remember? It's all one ocean. The debris of one mind floats into another. The same little polyp grows the idea in another head. He smiled and touched my head. But these gatherings are full of people who see the world in a different way now. They carry a lot of heavy equipment, suntan oil, scuba tanks. They're only concerned with the how, not the why. I belong to another world. Even Darwin searched his desk for a pen more than the seabed, you know. He relied on reports, talk, gossip, a tallow line. He looked into himself. In our minds, we have swum the same sea. Do you understand? An imagined world. The one time I did swim out to Mr. Salgado's real reef back home, I was frightened. The shallow water seethed with creatures, flickering eyes, fish of 100 colors darting and digging, sea snakes, sea slugs. I swam into a sea of sound, my breathing punctuated by clicking and clattering, the crunching of fish feeding on white tips of golden staghorn. My own fingertips seemed to whiten before me as triggerfish, angelfish, tigerfish, and sandstone pufferfish swirled around me. Mr. Salgado shook his head. I should have done something, you know. I used to think that in a month or two, the next year, I would have a chance to turn our whole bay into a sanctuary, a marine park. I used to plan it in my head, you know, how I'd build a safe harbor. We could have shown something We could have shown something to the world, something really fabulous. Why didn't we? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Romesh. And now our next writer is going to kind of introduce himself, but I read an article that he wrote in The Guardian last year, and he quoted somebody who I feel is here tonight, who's very important, I think, in this act of resistance, who's John Berger, who died in 2017. And I feel, yes, here we are protesting, we are refusing, we are rebelling for the children of the future, but I also feel very strongly the presence of the dead. And the quote that he had from John Berger in his article is that we here are all storytellers. Lying on our backs, we look up at the night sky. This is where stories began, under the aegis of that multitude of stars, which at night filch certitudes and sometimes return them as faith. Here to talk about filching certitudes and faith is Peter Hall.
Somos el mar, Versin das Meer. Nous sommes la mer, we are the sea. The biggest living thing on our planet, provides the air and the food we eat. It contains the largest animal on the planet, the whale. When I was a little boy, I loved whales with a passion. We persuaded my mum and dad to drive me and my sisters to Windsor Safari Park to see the dolphins. We sat at the front of the aquarium. A big gate opened up at one end. In leapt the dolphins, hydrodynamic, exquisite, beautiful creatures. Someone held up a hoop. The dolphins jumped through the hoop. They threw a ball in the air. The dolphins spun the ball on their beaks. And at the end of this performance, the dolphin caught a fish as a reward. I started to feel uneasy with what I was witnessing, my sisters and I. Then the dolphins were cleared from the arena and a bigger, blacker gate opened up at the other end. And in swam Ramu, our other performer, an orca, a killer whale. The most successful animal on this planet, not human beings. Orcas, evolved in their state, have been around for 6 million years. They are social, tool-using, matriarchal animals present in every ocean. Ramu, our other performer, jumped through a hoop, balanced a ball on his nose, and caught a fish in his beak. I had to stop loving whales at that moment. It was a moment of apostasy. I realised what we did. Around that time, 2 hippie scientists went out from the coast of the island of Bermuda, Shakespeare's island of strange noises, and they lowered a hydrophone into the Atlantic Ocean and they heard a sound. The first time that sound was recorded, it was the sound of a humpback whale. You all know that sound now. It's almost a cliche. But imagine hearing that for the first time. Imagine realizing another animal other than us had culture, was singing what sounded like a lament, a threnody. If whales had been able to protest their abuse, we would never have been able to do what we did to them in the 20th century. 3 million great whales died at our hands last century. Whales are still dying at our hands, purposefully or actively. Fast forward to 2001, I was on holiday in Cape Cod. I was just about to leave, go back home, and I saw a sign advertising whale watching on the pier. And all those memories of that whale in that concrete tank outside Windsor came back to me, and I thought, I'm not going to give money to people to take me out to see whales being captive, as I thought. Nonetheless, I stowed my cynicism, paid my $12, got on the boat, stood on the prow of the boat. Half an hour later, out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, a 40-ton, 40-foot humpback whale breached right in front of me. This barnacled angel, Megaptera novoanglia, hanging there, and a diamond of sea spray. And being a practiced writer, I responded poetically. I said, fuck. Because there are no words to join our existence to the natural world. We can only bear witness. We can only bear witness. Since that day, I have been on a mission to the whales. I have appointed myself as an ambassador of the species. I've swum with whales. I've spoken with whales. And in the year 2006, I swam with whales for the first time in the islands of the Azores. We went to film for the BBC. And we came upon a pod of sperm whales in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean in the Azores. And I started swimming towards these whales. The director said, something's gone wrong, the camera's not working. He told me to come back. I wasn't coming back. I'd spent my entire life wanting to do this. And I started swimming through the water, very, very deep ocean. I didn't learn to swim until I was 29. Very scared of the water. There really are giant squid down there. There really are great white sharks down there. I'm swimming towards this pod of sperm whales, 12 sperm whales in front of me, wall-to-wall whale. And I realised I have no idea what I'm doing. As I do that, the largest of the whales, who I later realise is the matriarch of the group, they are all matriarchal, all whales are matriarchal, they've got life sorted out. She left the pod and started coming straight towards me. And I remembered very clearly that sperm whales are the only animals that could and indeed have swallowed human beings. I thought, this is going to be a great way for my finale for my book. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be around to enjoy it. But as she starts coming towards me, I realise she's not stopping. I think, oh my God, what's going to happen? She's either going to ram into me or open her mouth at the last moment. At that moment, I lose control of my bodily functions. And I think, oh my God, how rude to come visiting someone and piss on their doorstep. Just then, I start hearing it. Actually, I feel it through my body, through my skull, through my sternum. The whale echolocating me, creating a three-dimensional sound picture of me in her head. It was ironic. I'd spent all this time trying to write about whales, trying to describe whales, not finding the words. Here was a whale trying to find the words for me. And then she came right up to me, as close as you are now, with this eye the size of a grapefruit. Utter sentience. Something completely other, something alien, something we share this planet with, something that possesses the biggest brain on this planet, and no one in the year 2019 can tell any of us what she does with her brain. She can be in communication with her fellow whales over tens of miles. A fin whale can make a vocalization on one side of the Atlantic and be heard by another fin whale on the other side of the Atlantic. These are animals that exist in time and space entirely outside our parameters. And as she came close to me and looked at me with this eye, which I will never forget, I had one word again. It was sorry. And then she dove like a CGI animation from this Eve Klein blue into the dark velvety black and disappeared. We went back to land. For 3 days I couldn't sleep because every time I closed my eyes I just saw whales swimming through my head. There's nothing I can tell you about these animals. No words express them, no words can even give you an idea of them. But my God, a whale swam up the Thames this week. What kind of message is that for us? I don't know. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Philip Paull. And now, a writer who points to the future. I haven't read her book because it's not going to be published until February 2020. But ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Naomi Ishiguro. Thank you.
Hello. Just want to say you're all amazing for being here. This is something I wrote, inspired by for this event. And I was thinking that a lot of what the problem is at the moment is the cognitive dissonance around people being able to hold this sort of horrendous scenario in their heads and then not being able to sort of understand it emotionally. Obviously, none of you have this problem because you're here, but sort of generally it is an issue. So something that literature might be able to do with me and my fellow writers in the future is sort of tell stories that translate that kind of emergency feeling into ways that people can sort of make sense of it, or sort of things that are a bit more familiar. So this is something I wrote anyway. It's called Times of Crisis. When Ellie was a child, a geography teacher explained to her the difference between climate and weather. The weather is the emotion you feel in any given moment, Mr. Phillips said. The climate is what underpins all that. It's how you're doing, how you feel more fundamentally. And that's probably a vast approximation, not to mention a slightly self-centered way to understand climate and weather. But 9-year-olds, even Ellie, tend to have a self-centered streak, and she couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said as she went about her daily business of tying shoelaces, jumping over puddles, and clambering up trees. Climate versus weather. Your current emotions in the moment, and then really underneath it all, how you are. When Ellie got older, she fell in love, as human beings will tend to do. She fell in love with a woman called Maria, who walked on the high wire of her emotions like an acrobat at a small-time circus, unreliably, and yet as if she might have an important paycheck riding on it. "I'm fine," Maria would always say, clearing the wreckage, wiping the tears. "It's just a bad afternoon." Or, "You know me, I'm always like this. It's not as if it means anything particularly." Except she wasn't, though, always like this. Because there were days when she and Ellie would go walking by the river, and she'd take Ellie's hand and look up at the canopy of leaves above them, and Ellie would see a hint of something else then, a suggestion of a happier, more peaceful side to this woman she loved, still somewhere there, under the chaos. "This is how things are meant to be," Maria would say then. "Days like this, they ground me, they bring me back to earth." Except though they didn't really, not for any length of time, because as the weeks went by, Maria seemed to be spinning faster and faster on her own axis, tumbling ever more clumsily through the vortex of her life, the high wire act getting higher, more precarious, and with more people gathering around her to watch, to cackle and jeer and comment as her performance became ever more elaborate, ever more attention-seeking, destructive, desperate. "I'm fine," she'd say, still, leaning into Ellie's shoulder after a particularly bad night. "It was just a blip, I promise. Everything is definitely fine." And it's like the weather and the climate, Ellie told herself, remembering Mr. Phillips. Maria's fine, fundamentally. She's just full of weather, that's all. Storms and showers and hurricanes and fires. But she's okay. She'll be all right. "I'm fine," Maria kept saying, although these days, viewed purely on their own terms, her actions would seem to say the exact opposite. Daily, she was drinking enough to drown her thoughts in oceans too destructive and too deep for anyone to keep their head above. Her short-term memory, for some reason, seemed to be getting ever more erratic. And another thing, Ellie noticed. It seemed Maria was forgetting entirely how to be kind. The storm of Maria's emotions raged nightly, twisting everything Ellie said back on itself, forgetting promises only a few weeks old and smashing the kitchen crockery. Until one morning, Ellie woke to find Maria disappeared, the house empty. She phoned, she messaged, and then she dashed out in just pajamas and a coat and searched through the surrounding streets until she found herself at the river, back to where they had spent those few happy afternoons, wandering, everything seeming so calm to Ellie, though who knows what, she wondered now, those afternoons had really felt like underneath the surface to Maria. "I'm fine," Maria had always said. "I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine." Eventually, Ellie found her. She was quite a way up the river, sitting on the bank and apparently unharmed, although shivering and soaking wet. "I didn't want to go through with it," was all Maria said to Ellie then. "What stopped you?" Ellie asked, when she swallowed back her tears. "I remembered you," Maria told her. "Because it's like you always say, isn't it? About the climate and the weather. And there was still something there, something inside me. Enough left of something fundamental that was still okay. Okay enough to bring me back." "Don't tell me you're fine," said Ellie, sensing already what the next line of this awful conversation would be. They'd had something like it so many times already, in so many varying forms and formulations over the past days and weeks. "Don't you dare tell me you're fine. Tell the truth." For a moment, Maria only looked at her. And then all at once, something in her seemed to change. She reached out, taking Ellie's hands, and her eyes, Ellie noticed, seemed perfectly clear for the first time in months. "And help me," Maria asked her then. "Please, Ellie, I love you. Please help me." That's it. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Naomi. Our next writer is Anjali Joseph. She's been a teacher, a journalist, and much more before her first novel, Saraswati Park, in 2010, earned her numerous prizes, and she became she was nominated, she was called one of the most important writers under 40 in 2010, but here she is, Anjali Joseph.
Thanks for coming to this. When Monique Roffey, who is a bit of a force of nature and should probably have some kind of hurricane named after her, sent me an email about this, I felt conflicting impulses. One was that I'd been thinking and talking about this just like everyone else for some time now. And the other was I sort of felt embarrassed and kind of thought, well, why are writers special? Why should everyone else listen to us? But this morning I felt slightly better about it, and I kind of realized if there'd been a plumbers rebel movement in Trafalgar Square, I would have thought, good for you, plumbers. And then I thought, well, you know, we can do what we can do. So this is really short. This is just what I've been thinking about some of these things. And a lot of it echoes what people have been saying already. We're not alone in this universe. For a couple of thousand years, humankind has been telling itself a story of how it's better than the rest of nature. Somehow we began to feel we were separate from everything else. Animals, insects, hills, trees, the sea. We told ourselves this tale of isolation and carried on pushing away every reminder that we're not only connected, but just one part of the whole. It's hard to argue that we're the most intelligent species. Right now we look like a baboon sitting on a tree branch, industriously sawing through it, while maybe also giving some kind of discourse about how special primates are. But the one thing we are good at is learning. This is the time to see things as they are. There's a magic in seeing clearly and admitting the truth, because after that everything has to alter. The important rebellion now is internal and silent, a quiet big no to the way things have been so far. We can simplify, waste less, pay attention. The power isn't outside us, it isn't outside you. The way we vote, what we want, how we spend money, what we eat, what we read and watch and listen to, government and industries, companies are very, very interested in this stuff, you know that. As we change, they change. It's not too late, it's time. Thank you.
Thank you, Anjali. How are you doing, everybody? Come on! We're here. Look, it was supposed to be raining. It's not raining. We've got a great number of amazing speakers, writers coming up. Susie Orbach, Ali Smith, there's going to be Simon Sharma, and the wonderful Robert McFarlane as well. So, but the next speaker, writer is Gregory Norminton. He's a novelist and a passionate conservationist. And his most recent work, The Devil's Highway, was described as absolutely essential by George Monbiot, but here he is.
Thank you, Simon. Simon says one of my favourite lines in modern film, which is, there's a mole right at the top of the circus. He's been there for years. So, to get to shake his hand was very exciting. Anyway, fear wakes us up. And it floods us with cortisol. It suddenly got much louder. It floods us with cortisol. It's useful. It's also debilitating. What keeps us going is love. You can always get an applaud line if you say the word love. But it's true. We're here because we love the world. We love our children. And I want to read a couple of shortish poems, one of which very one, they're both of them I've written. So it's a very bad idea of a novelist to read some poetry, but I'm going to go anyway. The theme here is love. Sometimes we compete in our versions of what the land means for us. And often we're in conflict with people who we think they're bad and they think we're bad because we're trying to save what we love. And an example of this came to me when I was in Iowa many years ago. I really wanted to see the tall grass prairie, the amazing tall grass prairie, which is almost entirely gone. 99.9% of it is gone. It's even worse than England with its meadows, with its wildflower meadows. But there was one little opportunity to see some of this tall grass prairie, and that was in Rochester Cemetery, not far from Iowa City, because there, the cemetery was so old that the ploughing up to grow crops hadn't happened. So some of the prairies survived by accident, and it survived by accident because people love those they've lost. So here we go, in Rochester Cemetery. It's very de-dum-de-dum-de, but it'll have to do. The clouds disperse, and every stalk of tall and fallen prairie grass wears shining gems of molten glass under the red oaks where we walk. Here, tombstones gnawed by heat and frost bear names of settlers at their rest, who by their old interment blessed this grove with what the nations lost. But where we hoped to glimpse at last the fabled and ancestral sea which bison knew, unhappily we find a mower's blades have passed. And so beneath this harvest sky we trudge and contemplate a soil where after years of stubborn toil conqueror and conquest lie. Though vanquished weeds had grown above the vanished dead, and some would save a prairie, some their forebears' grave, the common ground in this is love. Our sense of purpose, our sense of spiritual connection to the land from which we've evolved is not something that we're only writing now. It's not something that only came with the hippies in the 60s. Some of our oldest literature is about this. There's a great Irish poem, Sweeney, The Madness of Sweeney, which many people might know. Sweeney Astray, it's Seamus Heaney's translation of it. And I, just because I love it so much, had an attempt to write my own version of Sweeney's hymn to the trees. It goes like this. I need trees about me for consolation. Leafy oak, giant of the wood. Hazel, little branching one, nursing your sweet nuts. Gleaming alder, you've no thorns to draw blood, only the blood red of your heartwood. Stabbing blackthorn, first flower light of spring, and your black slows as summer dims. Breeze delighted birch, queen of the wood, smooth and blessed. Aspen aquake with your rain song in cloudless weather, where the water runs and the blackbird goes to tilt away its thirst. Sweet herbs and the smudge on the tongue of wild strawberry. And I will live happily in an ivy bush high up in the antlered oak and never come out, for the warbling of the blackbird is sweeter to me than the prattle of men and women. I prefer the squeal of the badger in his set to the horn of the morning hunt. Give me the echo of a belling stag as it runs free from glen to glen. The father of this herd has a grey coat and bears as many branches as my aged oak. Would that I could hide in the covert of his head, roost among his antlers in a thicket of horn. I am Sweeney, accursed beggar. Madness forks from my skull into 1,000 tines. I too am hunted, haunted by voices, singing my lament and my hymn of praise. Thank you. And I want to end by quoting a real poet, the great American poet Gary Snyder. For me, hey, there we go. This kind of says it all. It was written 40 years ago. Maybe we're beginning to catch up with him. For the children. The rising hills, the slopes of statistics lie before us. The steep climb of everything going up, up, as we all go down. In the next century, or the one beyond that, they say our valleys, pastures, we can meet there in peace if we make it. To climb those coming crests, one word to you and your children. Stay together, learn the flowers, go light.
Thank you, Gregory. The light is going. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker, fat is a feminist issue. The impossibility of sex, bodies, all these groundbreaking works. Thinker, writer, psychotherapist, cultural critic. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Susie Orbach.
Gosh, this is a piece that I wrote for This Is Not a Drill, for Extinction Rebellion's initial book. But as you can imagine, it's a bit shrinky. It's a curious paradox. The more we're connected at a national and global scale, the less we seem to be able to take on the calamities that are brought to our screen. 5 years ago, a flood in Lower Manhattan knocked out the electricity, devastated New Jersey beaches. Lower Manhattan was a river. Elevators didn't work. The food shops had no lighting or fridges. Hospitals were on backup generators. As the water receded, the city returned to normal. And with it, for many, the awareness of what should have been a wake-up call receded too. How can we explain this curiosity, the fact of climate change being in our face, and yet our capacity for denial? I've been puzzling this much as I puzzle over other forms of denial. We participate in activities that are often against our best interests. We're seduced into thinking uncomfortable things will go away, or that science will solve the problems. But it's not accurate, and the urgency upon us means we need to engage with our own denial. I know that none of you are doing that here. I do know that. How can we do this? What's required of us psychologically to engage with rather than cut off from this knowledge? How can we envision what's happening when it isn't right in front of us? It's difficult to imagine our own deaths. How much more impossible to imagine that human activities might mean extinction. To come into knowing is to come into sorrow. A sorrow that is a thud, deadening and fearful. Sorrow is hard to bear. With sorrow comes grief and loss. Not easy feelings, nor is guilt, nor fury, nor despair.
Climate sorrow, if I can call it that, opens up into wretched states of minds and heart. We find it unbearable. Staying with such feelings is bruising and can make us feel helpless and despairing. It's hard, very hard, to stay with. And yet there's value in it if we can create context for doing so. The feminist movement taught us that speaking with one another allows truths to enter in and be held together. In creating spaces to talk and act as XR is doing, we transform our isolation. These spaces could include how we share how difficult the hurt is and how to deal with our own despair and rage. Facing feelings is not a substitute for political action, nor is it a distraction from action. Feelings are an important feature of political activity. Acknowledging our feelings to ourselves, to one another, makes us more robust. We need to mourn and to organize. There should be no contest. We know from conventional political struggles that the less we understand emotionally, the more our potential victories will lead us to missteps and a weakening of our legitimate concerns. When setbacks and external manipulations occur, which they inevitably will, there can be a pull to manage difficult feelings by collapsing into sectarianism. We can find ourselves projecting our frustrations, our fury, our disappointments at the slowness of change onto those who we mostly agree with, rather than those who are endangering justice. We need to work in broad coalitions where differences can be tolerated rather than fracture effective political actions. This doesn't mean weakening our positions. We need to find ways to encompass the range of progressive activities while speaking to people's emotional upset as well as their hopes. Climate justice is imperative. We can't afford to go into splits that can haunt progressive struggles. We have superb political analysis, probably from everybody here. We can all sign up to this analysis. What's missing, though, is how to hold the feelings we fall into denying. If we look at how moved and concerned children are when they hear about endangered bears, we see a taproot for political action. That taproot should be a part of the toolkit for activists. We need to accept our feelings of grief and fear, and we need to provoke conversations that touch the hearts of others. In doing so, we build a movement that can handle the horrors we're facing without the secondary issue of internal denial. We will be more, not less robust, more, not less effective, more, not less compelling. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We will be more, not less robust. We will be more, not less robust. Thank you, Susie Orbach. Poems, even when narrative, do not resemble stories. All stories are about battles of one sort or another, which end in victory or defeat. Everything moves towards the outcome, towards the end, when the outcome will be known. Poems, on the other hand, cross the battlefields, listening to the cries of the triumphant and the fearful, and they bring a kind of peace, not by any easy anesthesia, but by the recognition that what has happened cannot disappear as if it had never been. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to introduce you David Hasnot, who's one of our most notable poets, and he's going to read from Fire Songs, which won the Forward Prize in 2005, was shortlisted for both T.S. Eliot and Whitbread prizes. David Hasnot.
I wrote a triptych of poems about the climate crisis. They're called Man-Made as a group. They were written to photographs by my son, Simon, and set to music by Christian Mason. And this is the third of them, and it's called Icefield. A place of ice over ice, of white over white, and beauty in absences. There was a time when the only sound was the wind calling its ghosts, when the skyline was set clear as a scar on glass, when your heartbeat slowed with the cold, when your dreams brought in a white bird on a white sky, and music that could only be heard from time to time on the other side of night. Now the horizons are smudged. Now there's a terrible weight in the air and a stain cut hard and deep in the permafrost. Breakage and slippage, the rumble of some vast machine cranking its pistons, of everything on the slide, and the water rising fast, and the music lost. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, The Bees was a wonderful novel. It's by Laline Paull. She's here tonight. She was shortlisted for the Bailey's Prize. And notably won by Ali Smith. Her second, The Ice, is set in today's Arctic, and it's a lurid tale of truth. I'd like you to welcome her, please, Laline Paull.
Hi, it's an honour to be here, and I'm going to be very short. It's an extreme inconvenience to start caring and believing the truth. I didn't intend it to happen to me, but when I started researching a beehive, I had to understand about what was happening to pollinators. And once you understand on a micro scale, you have to understand on a macro scale, which was why my second novel went to the Arctic, where the most shocking things are happening in plain sight and nobody seems to mind, and treaties are broken and no one seems to care. The Svalbard Treaty of 1920, if anyone bothers to look at it. Anyway, to be brief, things that got me going were Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, and we wouldn't be here without Rachel Carson. Yeah, thank you, Rachel Carson. And also Margaret Mead, the American anthropologist who studied how young people are brought up and how that forms the societies they live in. And it's extremely important that we see that this is happening now. Young people are the reason we're here as well. But I'm just going to read what probably everyone knows Margaret Mead said, which is, never doubt that a small group of committed, thoughtful citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And this is not a small group, and I'm proud to be part of it. Thank you.
Wonderful words.